In the United States alone, more than a staggering 200,000 homicide cases are still unsolved. It's very difficult to imagine the emotions the victims' families must be going through. It's a weird mixture of feelings, trying to remain hopeful while waiting for the other shoe to drop. Well, that was exactly what 21-year-old Bethany Decker's family felt for almost 10 years. Young and pregnant, Bethany was having a bit of a crisis when she suddenly and unexpectedly vanished. Everyone had their suspicions, but there were no clues, and years would pass by without any closure for the grieving family. But all of that changed when a case that took place almost 150 miles away from Virginia proved to be the smoking gun in this cold case. The heartbreaking case of Bethany Decker shook the community of Virginia with its bizarreness, and it's a real-life example of danger always being close by, sometimes too close. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. It's totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future cases. Bethany Anne Littlejohn was born on May 13th of 1989 in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Bethany's mom, Kim Nelson, defined her as charming and a girl with a permanent smile on her face. Bethany also had two younger siblings, and she was the mother hen and the leader of the three. She always looked out for her younger siblings and was the encouraging, supportive, and confident big sister. After graduating from high school with stellar grades, Bethany enrolled at George Mason University in Fairfax, where she majored in global and economic change. According to Bethany's roommates, she was very intelligent and incredibly smart. She was the type of person who could jot down a gripping A+ material essay the night before a deadline. Honestly, I wish I could whip up these true crime documentaries that quickly. But Bethany was also very responsible and a multitasker, as while she was juggling her studies, she was also working full-time. But still, she did amazing at both her job and in school. According to friends, as soon as Bethany enrolled at George Mason University, she met someone, a man named Emil Decker. Emil was an Army National Guardsman, and he and Bethany pretty much hit it off from the get-go. Emil was head over heels for Emily. He would remember the smallest details she mentioned in passing and try to make them come true for her. Bethany's family also adored Emil and said that there wasn't a better man for Bethany than Emil. Their relationship was getting serious fast, and soon after they met, Bethany was actually pregnant with Emil's child. The pair was over the moon, and starting a family with the man she loved was something Bethany had always wanted, so this was pretty much her dream come true. Bethany and Emil quickly got married in 2009, and 6 months later the couple welcomed a healthy baby boy that they named Kai. All the while, Bethany was still attending classes at GMU and working to pay the bills. But Bethany and Emil's fairy tale marriage was anything but perfect. See, Emil was in the Army, and he would be deployed for months at a time, so he was rarely ever home. Immediately after the birth of their son, Emil was scheduled to be deployed in Afghanistan with his unit. This meant that Bethany would move in with her newborn into her in-laws' house, which was in Columbia, Maryland. At the time, the stress of having a newborn baby and having little money to make ends meet was slowly starting to creep into the couple's life. Bethany was still juggling her studies and even took another part-time job at an Italian restaurant in Centerville, Virginia, while Emil was deployed from one place to another, continents apart. At one point, Bethany even contemplated separation, as she felt as though the young couple had just rushed into things too quickly and that they should just take a step back and think things through. Well, Emil was upset by these thoughts, but because he genuinely loved Bethany, he wanted to give her what she wanted, even if it meant severing their marriage for good. Bethany, after Emil had been deployed to Afghanistan, decided to move into her own place, an apartment that was close to her job in Ashburn, Virginia. And this is where the rest of the case unfolds. But this was around the time when Bethany met another person, and soon, things would change for Bethany forever. Bethany, while working at the Italian restaurant, met 31-year-old Ronald Roland. Ronald was actually a Bolivian immigrant, and he worked in the same restaurant as Bethany. The two quickly formed a friendship, and before you knew it, Bethany was involved in a whirlwind affair with Ronald, as even though she and Emil had separated, they were still technically married. Bethany was at a weird place in her life, according to her friends. She was young, had many responsibilities, and was isolated and lonely because of her separation from Emil. She was also in the throes of financial strain. It was assumed that Bethany just wanted to be adventurous for once, and this was why she engaged in a full-blown affair with Ronald. But Ronald was the opposite of what Bethany needed in her life at that time. Ronald, even though he was charming and knew all the right ways to woo a lady, he was very emotional and a volatile person. According to Bethany's friends, Ronald was extremely controlling of Bethany, and he wanted to know her every plan and move. It was suffocating for Bethany's friends to see her with a man like this, and they obviously didn't have good opinions of Ronald. But sadly, Bethany was blind to all of this, and she just wanted a companion in her life to help cope with the loneliness. Despite her friends being wary of Ronald, he moved in with Bethany and her baby, and their affair started to get a lot more serious. But something else also escalated, and that was the violent behavior of Ronald. See, a lot of reports state that Ronald was a very jealous and violent person. It's believed that he even hurt Kai, Bethany's son. Kai was very scared in Ronald's presence and even had a black eye at one point. And to think that a grown man, who's also a father from a previous relationship, could hurt a small and defenseless child is just sickening, and it really shows who Ronald is as a person. Bethany's rendezvous with Ronald was a bad idea from the start, and even though Bethany was unaware of the severity of things in the beginning, she was now genuinely scared of Ronald. She even disclosed the affair and admitted her mistake to her estranged husband, Emil. He was understandably upset, but urged her to fix things with him before things got worse. Bethany knew that she needed to remove Ronald or herself from this messy and chaotic situation, and even her mom, Kim, was there to help her flee. But in mid-January of 2011, Bethany was at yet another crossroad in her tumultuous affair with Ronald. She was now pregnant with Ronald's child. And actually, Emil was the one who got to know first because the couple was scheduled to meet at the airport for vacation in Hawaii. But at that point, their relationship was running on empty, and both Bethany and Emil knew that it was only a matter of time before everything would come crashing down. Emil's reaction to his estranged wife's infidelity and pregnancy was not what you would expect, though. He wasn't angry, and even after all this, he wanted Bethany back. Having seen the brutal realities of war and just becoming grateful for being alive, Emil knew that his estranged wife's affair was just an inconvenient drop in the vast ocean of their lives. Emil and Bethany did go to Hawaii and had a great time on their vacation. They reconnected, talked, laughed, and rekindled their relationship as it was before. For Bethany and Emil, things were looking promising. But this happiness could only last so long. Bethany and Emil returned from their holiday on January 28, 2011, and Bethany had plans to visit her grandma. They had a great time together and spent the rest of the afternoon talking about Bethany's recent trip, among other things. Bethany also confided in her grandma about the stress of everything going on in her life. Emil even joined the two, and all three of them had dinner later that evening. But this joyful meeting was cut short when Bethany received a call from none other than Ronald. Now, it's unclear what the call was about, but we do know that after the call, Bethany rushed to leave and said, "You don't understand what will happen to me if I don't go home." Sadly, this was the last conversation Bethany would have with her grandma, and Emil, who was due to be deployed back in a couple of days on February 2nd. But Bethany did promise Emil that she would come to see him off at the airport before leaving her grandmother's house. But when February 2nd rolled around, there was no sign of Bethany, and Emil sadly had to leave without getting to say goodbye to the love of his life. Before leaving, though, Emil did call the restaurant where Bethany worked, and he was informed that she didn't make it for her shift. This seemingly alarmed Emil, and he let Bethany's family know that there was something wrong. Over the course of the next few days, Bethany was MIA. Friends and family tried to reach out to her, but she wasn't responding to any of the texts or calls. For Bethany's mom, Kim, this was disturbing, but her suspicions rose to the max when she started to receive weird texts from someone who claimed to be Bethany. Not only that, but Bethany's friends were also the ones receiving messages from Bethany on Facebook. But there was something off about the tone of the messages. They didn't sound like her. The words were misspelled, the English was very formal and broken, and everyone knew that the sender wasn't Bethany. On top of that, Emil also received an email from Bethany, but he knew right away that it wasn't actually from her. With all of these bizarre occurrences, Kim asked Bethany's grandparents to visit her apartment to check up on her, as they lived close by. When they arrived at Bethany's apartment, they immediately noticed something strange. Bethany's car was parked at a very odd angle, and it also had a flat tire. Bethany's grandparents went and knocked on her door, but there was no answer. Thinking better of it, 911 was immediately called, and 21-year-old Bethany Decker was reported as missing. Initially, the detectives thought that Bethany was a runaway. Maybe the stress of everything was too much, and she decided to just take a break from it all. But that wasn't Bethany. She wouldn't just disappear from the face of the earth and abandon her studies and job. Also, Bethany had a son, and she would never just up and leave and desert him. She was also currently pregnant, so she couldn't have made such a rash and sudden decision to leave everything and just take a break. Shockingly, 3 long weeks had passed. Bethany hadn't reached out to anyone during this time, and now it was starting to really worry her family. Once Bethany was reported missing, the investigators decided to look into her credit card and phone activity, and it was found that Bethany hadn't used any of her cards since January 29th, and her phone was not active after 2:08 p.m., after she'd called her work to book more shifts. And also, she hadn't shown up for her job or her classes, which was very alarming. The police also checked Bethany's apartment and car, and there was no evidence to point to the fact that there was any sort of foul play involved. There were also no signs of forced entry. All of Bethany's belongings, including her passport, were in the apartment, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was in March that the detectives decided that they needed help from the public and the FBI. They searched remote areas and bodies of water. They held press conferences for any information. The FBI was also trying to make sense of what had happened to Bethany. The investigators had information that Emil was the last to see Bethany, and naturally they strongly suspected him in her disappearance. Emil was flown back to Virginia, and he was interrogated by the police. But even though Emil might have been a person of interest, and he could have also had a motive, seeing as his wife did cheat on him, there was nothing that could link Emil with Bethany's disappearance. Emil also had an airtight alibi. He was genuinely worried for Bethany's safety, and he cooperated with the police all throughout the investigation, and even voluntarily took a polygraph test. Emil even voiced the police's suspicion with nothing but understanding, but he was willing to cooperate in every way he could to make sure that Bethany was safe. The detectives were left confused and were essentially hitting one dead end after another. What was so infuriating was that Bethany's case was still being treated as a missing person case, and this led some people to believe that the investigators weren't investigating as deeply as they should have been. But all that changed when a peculiar name was brought to their attention, and it was Ronald Roland. The police decided to question him as well, and right away they found out that Ronald was actually the last person to have seen Bethany, not Emil. According to Ronald, he and Bethany had broken up, and he was not living in her apartment anymore. He said that he last saw Bethany on January 29th, and that she seemed to be normal and not frantic at all. When detectives checked Ronald's activity on the day that Bethany was last seen, he left her apartment in the afternoon, went to an ATM, and withdrew cash at 4:26 p.m. Then he stayed with his ex-girlfriend, Danielle, with whom he has 2 children. He even texted Bethany twice, once at 4:01 p.m. and then at 4:31 p.m., letting her know where he was. A search warrant was issued for Ronald's apartment, but again, nothing was amiss. There was no evidence on his electronics, no sign of a struggle in his house, nothing. But the investigators dug deeper. Shockingly, they also found that Ronald had a criminal record, but it did not link him to Bethany's disappearance. Days, months, and even years passed by, and sadly, Bethany's case was getting cold with almost 0 leads and no evidence. It was heartbreaking for Bethany's loved ones because they wanted to know where Bethany was. On Mother's Day in 2012, Bethany's family got together for what would have been her 23rd birthday and celebrated with a large 3-layered cake in Bethany's favorite color of orange. Bethany's case was even aired on numerous news channels, including True Crime Daily and even on Investigation Discovery in November of 2012 in hopes of making her disappearance more public. Bethany's case was also assigned to a new detective, and although her family was hopeful, nothing came up from this. But almost 3 years after Bethany's unexplained disappearance, in November of 2014, an unrelated case that was being investigated turned Bethany's missing person case right on its head. On November 12, 2014, in North Carolina, a 911 call was placed. It was called in by a woman named Vicki Willoughby. She'd confessed to shooting her boyfriend in self-defense. Now, according to Vicki, her boyfriend had crept up behind her, attacked her, and beaten her badly. Trying to get away from him and wanting him to stop, Vicki grabbed her gun, which was tucked away under the furniture, and fired at her boyfriend. But that didn't stop him from snatching the gun from Vicki's hand and firing back at her a further 3 times. Even in this grave state, Vicki managed to escape the house and made a call to 911 from a neighbor's phone. The police and emergency services were immediately dispatched, and upon arrival, they found a baffling and horrific scene. See, Vicki's boyfriend was the same person of interest in Bethany's disappearance, Ronald Roland. He was immediately arrested by the police, and in the meantime, Vicki was rushed to the hospital for her serious injuries. Luckily, Vicki pushed through and recovered completely, although she did lose an eye, which is awful in its own right. Ronald was charged with attempted murder, but shockingly, these charges were dropped when he agreed to a plea deal. He was sentenced to only 6 years in prison for almost taking Vicki's life, and that's just unbelievable to me. But after Ronald's sentence, it was decided that he'd be handed over to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement for deportation back to Bolivia. After the vicious attack, Vicki had a lot to say about Ronald. According to Vicki, Ronald would often threaten her by saying, quote, "I've made people disappear." Vicki, after suspecting and confronting Ronald about possibly having a hand in Bethany's disappearance, only became more terrified of Ronald's dangerous and violent actions. Vicki, after the terrible attack launched by Ronald, was even more determined to bring him down once and for all, before he could hurt another woman and drive her to her tragic end. Vicki made several public appearances on news channels and even on Dr. Phil, telling her horrific tale. She even met up with Bethany's mother, Kim, and the two quickly became friends. Kim was in awe of the sheer display of strength and relentlessness from Vicki, and Vicki was trying her best to offer any kind of support she could to help her solve her daughter's cold case. With this new twist in Bethany's case, detectives dug even deeper into Ronald's life, especially after his affair with Bethany, and they found one very disturbing detail. Before Vicki, Ronald was in a relationship with a waitress named April, and she'd actually pressed charges against him for pushing her down the stairs, being verbally abusive, and being violent towards her. The charges were actually dropped when Ronald made his way out with money, $2,500 to be exact. When detectives on Bethany's case finally decided to question Ronald, he was very volatile, angry, and refused to speak with anyone. This is how the police knew they had their man. In November of 2020, almost 9 years after Bethany had disappeared, an arrest warrant was finally issued for 42-year-old Ronald Roland for the disappearance of 21-year-old Bethany Decker. This was made possible when detectives looked at social media activity around the time that Bethany disappeared. It was revealed that both Bethany's and Ronald's Facebook accounts were accessed by the same IP address, so it's highly likely that the messages received by Kim, Bethany's friends, and even Emil were sent by none other than Ronald. It is speculated that he did this to make it seem like Bethany was still alive, when in fact she was not. Why the detectives didn't look into Bethany's social media soon after she disappeared, though, well, that's beyond me. 9 years just seems like an insane amount of time, and they're lucky there was even any evidence left after nearly a decade had passed. But anyway, Ronald was charged with abduction, and later he was also charged with the second-degree murder of Bethany, but he pleaded not guilty. Ronald's trial was to be held in January of 2023, after being rescheduled 2 times. But in November of 2022, Ronald finally pleaded guilty to the charge of second-degree murder. As for the abduction charge, he took another plea deal. This guy clearly had 2 obsessions: harming women and taking plea deals. Anyway, as part of his agreement, he had to give up an account of what actually happened on January 29th of 2011. And according to Ronald, he and Bethany got into an argument in the apartment. In a fit of rage, Ronald pushed a pregnant Bethany backward, which caused her to stumble and hit her head on a windowsill, and she instantly lost her life. According to Ronald, he checked for her pulse and was afraid to call 911, so he put Bethany's lifeless body into a Christmas tree disposal bag and disposed of it in a trash compactor at their apartment complex. So if you believe this version of events, which I'll say I don't, then case closed, right? Ronald confessed. Well, not really, because Ronald did deny using Bethany's Facebook account and sending messages to her friends and family. So who did this? Well, according to official records, we have no idea. But between you and me, I think we know what's really going on here. The prosecutors were confident that even with the circumstantial evidence and no body, Ronald would be punished for his heinous actions. Given his history of abuse and violence against women, Bethany's death could not have been accidental. But on February 21st, 2023, Ronald was sentenced to the maximum sentence for that charge, which was 40 years in prison. He has a chance of getting out after just 12 years, which would be sometime around 2035. But if he commits another crime while in prison, then his plea deal is called off, and he'll be forced to serve the full 40 years. Ronald's sentencing was a bitter moment for Bethany's family. For almost 10 years, Bethany's family and friends held on to hope that Bethany may still be alive and well, but in a matter of a few minutes in court, they were struck with the horror of finding out that their daughter was tragically gone. It's just so heartbreaking and devastating to even imagine what Bethany's family was going through, sitting in that courtroom, facing Bethany's killer. It was a revolting thing to experience. The only question everyone has is why? Why did Ronald do what he did? We can all agree that it probably wasn't an accident, given the type of man that Ronald was and his behavior towards women. But what was the reason to take the life of a woman who was bearing his child, and to do it so ruthlessly? My personal best guess is that he must have caught wind of Bethany rekindling her relationship with Emil, and that just didn't fit into his picture-perfect fantasy of controlling Bethany's every move. What's so tragic about all of this is that Bethany's body to this day remains undiscovered. No one knows where her remains are, and it's just another hurtful reminder for Bethany's loved ones that they may never know exactly what happened to her, and they'll never get the chance to lay her to rest. Vicky was yet another victim of Ronald, and even though what she went through was absolutely harrowing, she was the main driving force in Ronald finally getting caught. And I truly hope that Bethany's family and Vicky are healing from this traumatic event, because it's nothing less than a nightmare. And while what happened to Bethany is beyond terrible, maybe on some level they can find some semblance of peace in learning that this serial offender is now behind bars, at least for now. As for Emil, he filed for divorce from Bethany, which he legally had to do since her body was never found, and he's gained full custody of their son, who's been forced to grow up without his mother. Even though Emil is a wonderful father and showers his son with all the love and attention in the world, it's heartbreaking to see that the child lost his mother in such a horrific way. Bethany Decker was a young woman who had a lot to look forward to, but one wrong and pivotal decision changed everything. This case is beyond awful, and it really shows what goes on in abusive relationships like this. You've got to know it's never too late to start again, so if you're struggling, know that there is a way out. Reach out and get the help you need to take control of your life, because you deserve more than being suffocated by an insecure and sorry excuse of a person. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Martin MC and Denise. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it's currently the best way you can support the channel and help out. And I truly appreciate all of you that have decided to do that. If you also want to join, you can click that big blue join button below the video, or you can find the link down in the description. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.